I'm going to hand over to Neil now. This is Neil Shah from the Stress Management Society. We are very excited to welcome him to Latus Group HQ today. So Neil, off you go.
Thank you.
See you soon.
How many of you have ever experienced stress at work? Now, as much as I can't physically see your hands, I'm pretty sure many of you, in fact, I can see some virtual hands going up, are putting your hands up. How many of you are concerned about the impact that stress is having on the people around you, friends, family, people in your community? And once again, I'd be surprised if many of you weren't putting your hands up. But that being said, how many of you have never, ever experienced stress in the workplace or noticed it in anyone else? By the very fact you're here, I'm pretty sure there aren't going to be many hands going up to the last question. But even if you have put your hand up to the last question, I appreciate you being here. I'm hoping there is something that you will be able to take away from this session or things that you can share from your perspective. So as we are still admitting people, there's people coming in thick and fast. We're just welcoming you all. What I would like for you to be able to do is just as we are getting started, if you just want to pop into the chat, what's your name and where you're from? Let's just get a sense of where everybody's from. Where are you coming into this session from? I know we've got lots of people that are joining us through Latus, and many of you have previously attended some of our sessions as well. It's a little bit different. You'll firstly notice this incredible setting that we have. It's a really beautiful environment, very different from the meeting room in our office that we normally do our sessions from. So I'm really blessed and honored to have this incredible team, this wonderful facility around us. And yeah, it's great that we've got people from all around the UK and hopefully some from a little bit further afield as well. So hopefully the sound issues have resolved themselves. I noticed a couple of you mentioned that you couldn't hear. If you are having any technical difficulties, please pop that into the chat. The wonderful Matt is here behind the screen, ensuring that everything runs smoothly, and Davinia's here to support as well. So let's get into this. So if we could get the next slide, please. Who are we? Who am I? For those who've never come across me before, my name is Neil Shah. I run an international organisation called the Stress Management Society, which is a non-profit organisation I set up in 2003, essentially to help individuals and organisations recognise and reduce the impact of stress. We also run a research and consultancy arm, which is called International WellBeing Insights. And through both sides of the organisation, we've reached millions of people around the world over the last 21 years. With a vision of creating that happier, healthier, more resilient world. And I started this organization off the back of first-hand experience. I didn't come into this off the back of professional or academic expertise. I came into this off the back of a first-hand experience, which ultimately led me to have a breakdown, at the depths of which I got to the point I didn't want to be here anymore, and I took action against that. Thankfully, I failed, but it was through the recovery of that experience that I realized that my calling, the gift that I'd received through that experience, was to be able to step into a line of work that allowed me to help other people, to essentially to make the world a bit of a better place. And that's been my mission, my ikigai for the last 21 years. So as we could move on to the next slide, please. That as we get into today's discussion, the first thing I want to establish, particularly that the focus of today's discussion is stress in the workplace, is to consider that there is a cost, both cultural and commercial, to stress. And many of you may have taken the opportunity to complete the survey, which we shared in advance of today's session. And just from the people that responded to that survey, 40% of people that respond to that survey did not feel able to successfully balance work and personal life. It feels like work is bleeding into all aspects of our life. Our work day for many of us starts the moment we wake up and it finishes the moment we go to sleep. We used to have a clear delineation between work and home, the commute, but now many of us work from home or we work in a hybrid fashion where we don't often have the barriers, that kind of white space between work and home to decompress. 35% of people do not feel that they get the support they need from their organization when it comes to their well-being. There's another study I saw recently suggesting 60% of people that struggle with their mental health don't ask for help, don't seek out support. 38% of people don't feel valued at work. And 30% of people don't feel confident in their ability to manage their own stress effectively. So this seems to be a universal issue. And what I've observed over the last 21 years is it seems to be getting worse, not better. 1 in 4 of us experience mental health issues in any given year. The main cause of death for a man under the age of 45 in Western society is sadly suicide. So it seems like there is a growing issue, which we still are yet not comfortable having open conversations about. And hopefully today we can plant some seeds so we can start taking action and addressing this in a way that yields a positive result. So this is really where the first step is understanding what we're here to talk about. We're all looking for a solution to stress. We're all looking for that magic pill, the silver bullet, to be able to eradicate stress. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. I don't think our job should be to eliminate stress, but it's to understand what it is. We need to understand the question before we can seek the answer. And the question I put to all of you is, what is stress to you? What do you experience when you're stressed, particularly at work? When I asked the first question, have you experienced stress before? Most of you would have responded in some way, shape, or other to say that you have had this experience. But what is it that you experience? What happens when you experience stress? So maybe put some answers into the chat and let me know what your experience around this is. What happens? What do you experience? Okay, I see a few responses coming in. Freezing and shutting down, headaches, migraines, being short people, racing thoughts, being overwhelmed, irritable, tension, confusion, mind fog. Now, panic attacks, absolutely, thank you. I can see the responses coming in thick and fast. So this, for me, is where we need to start our discussion, because as you can see from most of the responses, that we tend to associate with the feelings or the emotions of stress, feeling overwhelmed, feeling angry, irritable, etc. As much as there are some physical responses, a lot of the things we tend to associate with are the feelings or the emotions of stress. And note the question isn't what you feel, it's what you experience. And actually, until we really start to understand where stress starts, we are dealing with the symptoms and not the cause of stress. The best way for me to describe to you what stress is to share with you a personal experience. Because of the work that I do, because I run an international organization called the Stress Management Society, and I'm the chief de-stressing officer of our organization, and I spend my life talking about how to manage stress, people believe that I never get stressed. Interesting thought. It would be like saying to a doctor, I bet you never get ill, or saying to a mechanic, I bet your car doesn't break down. Of course, a mechanic's going to experience problems with their car, and of course, a doctor is going to experience problems with their health at times. But they know how to recognize the issue and know what action to take to be able to do something about it. And I describe myself in the same way. I experience stress just like everybody else, but I'm able to recognize it early, and I like to believe I've got the tools to be able to manage it in an appropriate way. And the last time I had a major episode of stress was probably about 15 minutes ago, to be honest. We've had a few little technical challenges in the background, and as it was getting closer and closer to the time we're supposed to start, I'm starting to think to myself, okay, we're going to get it sorted, everything's going to be fine. I've been here since 10 o'clock this morning, we've been practicing, we've had a few little side interviews take place. So I thought to myself, it's fine. But as it's getting close to that point where we're going to start, knowing that there's 1,000 people registered to be here today, I started to feel a bit of anxiety rising. I started to feel a bit warmer, even though the temperature in the room hasn't changed. My heart's pounding in my chest. My breathing's becoming shallow and fast. All of a sudden, my blood is relaxed. I need to go to the toilet. My blood pressure's risen. My blood sugar's risen. My teeth are gritted. I'm starting to feel angry and hostile. The technology's not working when we're about to start a session. Now, okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but how many of you can relate to some of those symptoms? Because that, my friends, is what stress is. It's the release of hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that change the way that your body is functioning. For what reason? What is the benefit of that state? Well, you've gone into the fight or flight state. Fight or flight is a natural, instinctive, primitive response given to us by nature as a survival mechanism. If we think of the first humans that first surfaced on the plains of East Africa 300,000 years ago, let's imagine a lady called Caveman Joanna who's strolling through the jungle back to her cave to watch cave television with her cave family. A saber-toothed tiger pounces out in front of her. She's got one of two choices to deal with that situation. Either she can turn and leg it as quickly as she can to escape from danger, or she can dive on the tiger's back and try and wrestle the tiger to the ground, overpower him to essentially save her own skin. That is why we have the stress response, to equip us to fight hard or run fast, which is a great way to respond to physical threats to our life, to our safety. But how did that help me 20 minutes ago, preparing for this webinar, technical challenges? How did it help me to deal with the situation? Well, unless I was going to start smashing equipment to bits and running out of the office, that probably wouldn't have helped me to deal with the situation anyway. And I'm not sure Matt and Davinia would have been very happy if I started to smash their technical equipment and run out of the studio. So this is the challenge. Most of us, when we experience stress in our day-to-day lives, as much as you might be stressed at work and feel like smashing your computer to bits and running away, or you're dealing with financial issues, you look at your bank balance and feeling overwhelmed, or there's day-to-day challenges just from the pressures of life, as much as you might find that you're feeling overwhelmed, there isn't generally, for most of us, things to fight or run away from, which means there is no outlet for stress. There is no channel for it. And it tends to compound and compound, and then we feel overloaded, overwhelmed, and exhausted. And this is really where, rather than demonizing stress, is to understand the purpose it serves and how we can channel it and use it in a way that nature intended us for you to use it. So rather than looking at it as a black or white, I'm stressed, I'm not stressed, it's more considering it to be a spectrum, 0 to 100. And in any given situation in life, a degree of stress is going to be useful, beneficial, and helpful. So if we could move on, Matt. Thank you. And this is that point. Is it good or bad? What are your thoughts on this? We often hear the terms good stress and bad stress, which I believe are incredibly misleading because it suggests there's different types of stress. I don't agree with that. There's only one stress response. There is different severities of that response. So as Jack's saying, it can be useful and properly managed. John's saying is how we can react to stress. Appreciate that. It's useful to have stress sometimes. It can motivate you. Absolutely. I know we do perceive it as a negative. I like that, Sophie. It's good until it becomes a problem, of course. And this is really where, actually, the better we understand it, the easier it is to be able to recognize we're in a state that is not serving us. And just like for me, just before we started this session, I was noticing that, okay, the anxiety is creeping up a little bit because it's not working as it should be. Okay, I can take steps to alleviate this response I'm experiencing. There are some simple responses that we can, some simple measures that we can implement, should I say, to help in those kind of situations. Your body's expecting physical activity, even moving. Going for a walk, stretching, taking some breaths can really help, but we'll get to that. But before we do, I think it's important that we sort of further explore this spectrum of stress as we've been describing it. So Matt, if we can move on, thank you. And I would describe stress more, as I said, as this spectrum. At the top end of the spectrum, you hit a stage that I would describe as burnout, where the pressure, the demand, the stress you're experiencing in is so great. Doesn't matter how well equipped you are, how resilient you are, how broad your shoulders are, every single one of us will eventually get to the point where we burn out. And sadly, more and more people are in an unsustainable state, edging towards burnout. At the upper end of the spectrum, when you eventually hit the 100 on the spectrum of stress, you shut down, you become non-functional. You aren't able to go about dealing with the challenges of daily life. At the other end of the spectrum, where there isn't enough stress, pressure, or demand for extended periods of time, or a perception of a lack of pressure, we experience rust out, where we become bored, sluggish, lethargic. We procrastinate, you become cynical, bitter, your self-esteem, self-confidence starts to diminish. And after a while, you just start losing kind of the zest for life. So that's something that, up until a few years ago, a lot of people wouldn't have been able to really appreciate what that looks like. But particularly in and around sort of the lockdown period during the pandemic, there were many people that, because we were kind of shut off from our normal levels of societal function, started to experience that level of rust out, where you could get through days without getting dressed or showering or putting on clean clothes. These sadly are signs of depression, and this is something that many people have an experience of around that period. But then there's the sweet spot, which is known as the performance zone. This model was originally drawn from sports psychology. There was a period many years ago where we did some work with the FA, the Football Association here in England. And this was understood to be a really amazing model to understand how we channel the best sports performance. And that performance zone would often be described as being in that peak flow state, being in the zone, being on fire, where, yes, there's pressure, but we're thriving under that pressure. We're working well together. You're enjoying what you do. It doesn't feel like hard work. We're effective. We're efficient. We're thinking outside the box. We're creative, and we're achieving results. And also managing our boundaries. You tend to get more done in less time. The simple way to describe this is the Goldilocks and the Three Bears approach to stress. The zone of burnout is when the porridge is too hot. It will literally burn your face, and you're not going to be able to eat a whole bowl of scalding hot porridge. It's not healthy and it's not sustainable. The zone of rust out is the porridge is too cold. It's not palatable. It's not enjoyable at all. And then the performance zone is where the porridge is just right. Now, I totally appreciate every so often, every single one of us is going to have moments where you step into the performance zone, step out of the performance zone and into the zone of burnout. Not quite a full burnout stage, but you've had to push yourself a little bit hard because something's happened, something needs to be dealt with. A deadline, an unexpected scenario, an emergency. And there are times where you may inadvertently or out of choice end up in the zone of rust out. For example, you go on holiday and you just want to be doing nothing, and you're removing all the pressure and demands for your life for a period of time, and that's absolutely fine. The challenge comes in is when we spend our lives living in those states. It's not sustainable, it's not healthy, and it's not good for you. So this is really where I'm going to ask you all to consider, what does your performance zone look and feel like? I'm sure we've all had periods in our life where we were firing all cylinders. You were loving what you do and you felt like you were on top of your game. If you've experienced it before, you can experience it again, because once we understand the ingredients, the recipe to create the performance zone, we should be able to replicate this as well. But sadly, most of us are being pushed into that burnout state because of the pressures and demands of life, because we never switch off. We're living unsustainably, and the mental and emotional demands we're subjected to over time, sadly, can lead to burnout if we leave them unchecked. So this is something that I think is important for you to take away from today's discussion, is how can you manage your states so you're spending as much time as possible in the performance zone. If we can move on, please, Matt. Thank you. And to really help to give further context to this, let's move the conversation away from feelings and emotions, because often when we talk about stress, as we did at the beginning of the session, when we talk about stress, we tend to relate to the feelings and the emotions of stress. And for people that don't do feelings, it becomes a conversation that's a little bit hard to engage with. particularly in modern society, we have phrases like grown men don't cry, or pull your socks up and get on with it, soldier on. We don't like to admit weakness or vulnerability. Vulnerability, sadly, for many has been framed as a weakness. I disagree with that. I feel vulnerability is a strength. It takes the strong amongst us to be able to show themselves and to admit when they're struggling, rather than hiding it and pretending like everything's okay until it's not. So this is really where this analogy is a really useful approach. It was originally offered to me through a chance conversation with someone that I met on a plane on the way to New York, and we were having a conversation, and eventually the conversation got around to what we do for a living. I said to him, "What do you do for a living, mate?" And he turned to me and said, "I'm a stress tester." I was like, "Wow, fascinating. What's the chances of that?" "I'm in stress management too." "What are you, a doctor, psychologist, health and safety professional, researcher?" And he's looking at me blankly. "What are you talking about, Neil?" I said, "What do you stress test?" He said, "Structures, materials, bridges, buildings." Guy was a structural engineer. He specialized in stress testing, but not to people, to objects. And that led to one of the most fascinating conversations I've ever had. I asked him how he defines stress. And this was at a time where we were trying to come up with a universal definition of stress that anyone could get their heads around. And we found that actually, depending on who you talk to, you get a different response. You speak to people in the academic communities, they'll have a way of defining stress. You speak to people in the psychology community, they have ways of defining it. Medical professionals have a definition, but none of them necessarily agree on a common universal definition. And this chance conversation with this structural engineer actually led to probably one of the most influential conversations I've had regarding my take on stress. So I asked him how he defines stress, and he told me. He said, F over A equals P. So, okay, of course, why would I have thought anything else other than a formula or an equation? And John, you're absolutely right. The amount of force needed to break something. And even when he told me what the letter, it told me his equation, I didn't really know what he was going on about. So I asked him to explain further, and he gave me a bit more insight that his definition of stress was force over area equals pressure. Now, even when I understood what the letters stood for, it still didn't make it any more clear for me. So I remember him getting a napkin out and doing a diagram, and this, what you see on screen is a visual representation of what you put onto the napkin, and he drew a bridge. This happens to be Tower Bridge in London. I'm a Londoner. And let's just say on this particular day, Transport for London have gone on strike, put all their red double-decker buses onto the bridge, filled to the top with the union reps, all discussing their various challenges and demands. The black cabs of London have also decided to get involved because they're fed up of Uber stealing all their business, so they're on there. The gates of London Zoo have blown down and the animals have rushed onto the bridge. Tidal surge on the River Thames, and HMS Belfast has managed to get washed onto the bridge. We've got some protesters up there that are protesting about whatever they're protesting about today. They're on the bridge as well. Heathrow Airport's had to shut down because the runways melted. So we've got a couple of Airbus A380s done an emergency landing onto the bridge. So you can see there's a lot of load, a lot of demand, a lot of pressure on the bridge at the moment. I'm sure we all agree, whether it's Tower Bridge, Golden Gate Bridge, Sydney Harbour Bridge, every bridge on the planet, if enough pressure is put on it for long enough, every bridge will ultimately collapse. I'm sure we all agree with that. But before it collapses, how do we know? There'll be signs, there'll be feedback to suggest the bridge isn't bearing the load effectively. There'll be bowing, buckling, groaning, creaking, fractures. And when it's giving you those clues, that feedback, you've got one of two choices. What are the options? The bridge is threatened to collapse. It's not collapsed yet. What are the options you have available to you to ensure the bridge doesn't go on to collapse? What do you think? What could you do? Bridge is struggling, groaning, creaking. Jack, absolutely right. One of the options, remove the weight. Get rid of some of those Airbus A380s. Get rid of HMS Belfast. Absolutely, take some of the weight off. And as several of you have said, the other option is to support it. Put some concrete blocks, iron girders underneath to better equip it to bear the load effectively. Now, when this engineers offer me this analogy, my first reaction is, oh my gosh, people are exactly the same. It doesn't matter who you are, how tough you are, how resilient you are, how broad your shoulders are. Every single one of us has an ultimate breakpoint. I totally take on board that different people have a different breakpoint. Some people are more resilient than others. Whether you're a special forces soldier or a stay-at-home mother, and I'm not for a second suggesting one's more stressful than the other, it's all about perspective, that every one of us will ultimately get to the point where our bridge is going to collapse. And that collapse could be serious. It could lead to, sadly, having a breakdown. It could lead to serious health issues because stress and pressure on our mental and emotional state can also have an impact on our physical state. And if we think of some of the top lifestyle diseases that are likely to kill a human being on the planet today, like heart disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, stroke, stress can both directly and indirectly contribute to all of those. Directly, because it changes the way that our body's functioning. Indirectly, it changes the way we live our life, and you're less likely to exercise, socialize, eat healthy, sleep well. All the things that give us positive well-being and a strong bridge are things we are less likely to do, and we're more likely to engage in things that don't serve us. Alcohol, drugs, poor food choices, not sleeping well, not socializing, all the things that bring health and well-being to our lives are the things that we tend to disengage from when we're struggling, which, as I said, can lead to serious illnesses. Some of them can be fatal. But also, sadly, we also have to talk about another classic sign of a bridge collapse, and we mentioned it earlier, and that's sadly suicide, which is shocking that in 2024 that's still one of the leading causes of death for a man under the age of 45 in Western society, rapidly becoming the same for 15 to 29-year-olds. And there's another classic sign of a bridge collapse. We've got to bear in mind there are choices, there are options. If we can recognize it when our bridges are bowing and buckling early enough, we can take action to prevent the bridge from getting anywhere near the point of collapse. Now, this analogy is true for you as an individual, for your team in your workplace, your family, your community, society, or the global population at large. And something that really I struggle with every single day is there more and more of us every day that are waking up with a bridge that's overloaded. As far as saying there are probably more people than not, for many different reasons on the planet today, that feel like their bridges are overloaded, overwhelmed, and are struggling to cope. And there are many different contributing factors to that. And if we get better at recognizing how our bridges are doing, we're more likely to recognize when other people around us are struggling. And we can then automatically start taking appropriate action to prevent anyone's bridge from ever getting anywhere near the point of collapse. And if we can move on, thank you. So very simply, there's two things to consider. How do we alleviate the load or reinforce the bridge? Our definition, the bridge analogy in words, is where the demand on an individual exceeds their capacity or their ability to cope with that demand. When there is more on the bridge than your bridge is able to bear. So let's start exploring the things that we can do to alleviate the load or reinforce the bridge. And the first thing is, well, what options do you have? Is everything on your bridge, does it need to be there right now? If there are things that you could prioritize, take off your bridge for now, put it in the diary and come back to it in a couple of weeks. Are there things on your bridge that are not your things? They're other people's things, or they're just societal things that you've basically absorbed because of what you've been exposed to in the news, on social media, by what people are talking about around you. They've now all of a sudden ended up on your bridge, you're struggling with them, but it's not your stuff, and there's nothing you can do to influence or change this. So there are things that you can let go. Are there things that others around you could help with? Your friends, your family, your community, your colleagues at work? Are there opportunities you could shift your focus, and rather than focusing on that little bit of dust on the edge of the bridge, you can actually put your focus on the big thing, like that Airbus A380, because if you get off your bridge is going to be doing a hell of a lot better. The challenge is when you're overloaded and you've got multiple different conflicting demands, sometimes we end up doing the things of least consequence because it's just like, just get rid of those emails, or just deal with those messages, because it gives you a sense that you're doing something, but actually it's not helping your bridge at all. So part of this is to consider, what options do you have about the load? What action can you take around the load itself? And Sally's got a point here. People ask me to do something. I used to always say yes, but I've learned that saying no sometimes offloads the bridge a little bit. Thank you, Sally. And I'm going to talk into that, if I may, because no is one of the shortest words in the English language, but it's one of the hardest ones for most of us to use. Because we're polite and we don't want to say no, and it feels like a rejection. It feels like you're saying to someone, go away, leave me alone, I don't want to help you. And most of us don't want to receive a no as well. You ask for something, you hope or much prefer it when someone says yes. And Sarah, sounds like you've been to one of our sessions before, because you're absolutely right. That's something I came up with a long time ago when I was writing my book, The 10-Step Stress Solution. Is a no isn't a word, it's an acronym. And it's a negotiation opportunity where we can actually have a conversation. And it's like, okay, Sarah, that you're asking me to take on this new thing. I just want you to understand I've got this, this, and this on my bridge. Here's the deadlines I'm working towards. Here's the consequences of failing to achieve those deadlines. So what would you like me to take off my bridge so I can focus on this thing that you're asking me to take on? Oh, what you're asking me to work on is a lower priority than what I'm currently working on. Can I schedule it and come back to this? Oh, everything you want me to do that I need to deal with, including new tasks of equal consequence. Well, I haven't got the capacity to cope with all of them. Could you either take something I'm currently working on so I can look at this thing, or can someone take on something I'm currently working on so I can take on board this new challenge? So what I'm saying to you is not no, but it's let's talk about it. Let's find a way that works for everyone to be able to fulfill all of the obligations that are required. So turning the no from not helping you to let's work together to find an appropriate solution is, for me, a really wonderful way of reframing what could on the face of it be seen as a rejection. Now, even if you have no ability to do anything about the load itself, there is still a secondary option, which is strengthening the bridge, putting that support in place. And the next slide, we're going to talk into that a little bit more. So what are the options we have? What kind of things do you suggest we can do? What do you currently do to reinforce your bridge, to build that resilience, to ensure you've got a strong mindset, so we can start reducing those negative automatic thoughts, so you can stay grounded and mindful? Because here's the thing, that there are many, many different things that you can do to reinforce that bridge and build resilience. Most of these you already know. It's not that we have the absence of information, is there are barriers to action. So there's obviously lots of suggestions coming up now, which is fantastic, like exercise, time management, mindfulness, etc., hobbies, social support. Of course, these are all wonderful things. And in fact, if we reduced it to the basics, not just in reinforcing your bridge from a mental and emotional perspective, but just general health strategies. Let's explore the 4 common basic fundamentals for good health. And let's see how many of you know this. How much water should you drink? What's the commonly accepted guidance? I'm not saying it's true or not. That's a conversation for another day. David, you're right. 2 liters. Everybody's heard the 2 liters or 8 glasses, right? So something we all know. Most of us have come across this information. The next question, it will vary from different parts of the world, but in the UK, we are recommended to have a certain amount of fruits and vegetables. And I know this information is also discussed in other parts of the world. I'm not saying it's true, but it's something that's often shared. Yeah, the 5 a day, as many of you are saying. So we've all heard the 5 a day. I appreciate in different parts of the world they have different approaches to this, but generally speaking, people have come across the 5 a day. What about sleep? How much sleep should we have? What are we often told is the optimal amount of sleep? 8 hours. Look at this. You all know the answers. You all know what you're supposed to be doing, right? What about steps? How many steps should you have in a day? I'd be surprised if most of you haven't come across this information. Yeah, there we go. Loads of you saying 10,000. So interesting. You all know the information. We actually were involved in a study on this. We asked people those 4 questions. 80+% of people knew how to respond to them, knew the right information. Does knowing this information bring any benefit to your life? Does just knowing this information bring any value to your life? So Stuart's saying no. Many of you are saying no. Wow, why are we saying no? I think we've all understood that staying hydrated, eating fruits and vegetables, sleeping and moving is good for your health. Why are we saying just knowing this information isn't going to bring any value to our life? Well, knowledge is power, right? No, it's not. I'm sorry, that's a lie. Anyone that believes knowledge is power, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but knowledge isn't power. The word power quite literally means the ability to do or act. Quite literally. And don't take my word for this, look it up in the dictionary. The word power, when applied to a human being, is the ability to do or act. The person with the greatest power has the greatest ability to do or act. So knowledge is power is quite literally saying knowledge is the ability to do or act. If you have this knowledge in your brain and you aren't taking action against it, it has given you no power. And less than 5% of people that know how to answer those 4 questions do it every single day. Less than 5% of people are drinking adequate amounts of water, eating enough fruits and vegetables, getting enough sleep and getting enough movement into their bodies. So this we've just highlighted that in a world of information overload, where anyone with access to Google, to Wikipedia, to YouTube, to Instagram, to TikTok, has all the information in the world available to you. I'm not saying it's all true, and it depends who you're listening to and which influencer's got the influence that day, might be sending you information which is, pointing in a particular direction. But the point is, it's easy to get the information. We've all got a device in our pocket or maybe even on our wrist that will give you the information. But the information doesn't bring you value. It's the action that does. And until you are taking the action, that information is pointless. I'm not actually here to introduce lots and lots of new information. What I'm here to do is compel you to take action, because nothing changes until you change. As Albert Einstein said, the definition of madness is doing the same things over and over and expecting a different result. If you want a different result, whether at an individual level, at a team, an organizational level, at a societal level, we need to start taking action to create the world and the lives that we want, rather than the ones that we're currently living. Because if I sat here and I gave you my top 10 things to deal with stress, by point 3 or 4, you'd be more stressed out than when I started. Why? Because those things take time and require a bit of effort. And most of us are overwhelmed because we don't have the time or the capacity to do the things that we know bring us positive gain. So this is really, over the course of this session, consider that if there are things that come up and you say to yourself, I know that, with all due respect, I have no interest in what you know. I have 100% interest in what you do. So if at any point you say to yourself, I know that, ask yourself a follow-up question. Do I do that? Do I do that regularly and consistently? Because if not, that information is bringing you no value. Now, obviously, today's session is about stress in the workplace. So let's kind of start getting into this. In the next slide, let's kind of start looking at where we can take this to bring value into our organizations. And this is really where, there's kind of an approach that we have adopted, which is what we call the WellBeing GPS. And this works at an individual, team, organizational, or societal level. If you get in your car and you want to program the sat nav only works if you have 2 pieces of information. Sat nav needs to know where I am right now and where I want to get to. Once we've got those 2 bits of information, the sat nav can calculate the route map. And when it comes to well-being, that's what I'm asking you to consider. Where are you right now? What is your start position? Do we understand what our life is like now? Have we taken the time to do some self-assessments? And there are many tools available. There is one on our website as well, which you'll find the link to our website at the end of the webinar. So you can assess where you are both at an individual or at an organizational level. But also the second point is, what does success look like? If I've started to achieve a stronger, more resilient bridge for me, what would that look and feel like? If I've started to create a stronger, more resilient bridge for my team or my organization, my community, what would that look like? I'm hoping that by the time I've finished with my work in this lifetime, that I've contributed, should I say, to developing a stronger societal global bridge where we are more resilient as a species, that we are better at recognizing when people are struggling and taking action to prevent any people from finding their bridges at a point of collapse, where we're not talking about suicide as one of the main causes of death for young people. That for me would be where, I've achieved an optimal outcome, but I also need to understand where I am right now so I can start taking steps to move towards that outcome. That's why I'm going to ask you all to consider this, both at your level as an individual, but also at a collective level. And as we go into this, that's where I'd like to share with you our model, which is how to create that culture of well-being. What is the recipe for this? Where do you start? So for those of you that feel that you've either observed, read about, witnessed this, or you work in an organization or in an environment that has created a culture of well-being, what does that look and feel like? How do you feel your well-being is valued? Where do you start with this? Julian, that's a great data point. The usage report in your mobile is a great way to think about the benefits of time used to engage with the device. Absolutely, yeah. And even just some simple kind of journaling prompts every day. It's just grade yourself from 1 to 10 or 4 to 19. To be able to kind of have some subjective measures. Suzette saying well-being champions in your work, that we talk about well-being a lot. That's great. So the starting point should be about making it more accessible, more of an open, accessible conversation. And what I'd like to share with you is, over the last 2 decades, having worked with thousands of organizations from all over the world, different industries, different cultures, different geographical regions, different structures, different size organizations, we found that underneath all the things that we think are different, there's a huge amount of commonality, and we have far more in common than we have that separates us. So this is really where I'd like to share with you a tried and tested recipe. And it's what we call our 7 E's formula for well-being. So as the framework says, there are 7 E's. And the first one is to engage people in that culture of well-being. Engagement is two-way dialogue. How are we having these engagement points? Whether that is having time within team meetings, discussions, and one-to-ones to check in on each other, not just to have technical, functional, and operational conversation, but actually to talk about how we're actually doing. And there are other ways to do that, through pulse surveys, through audits, through actually having it built into the annual sort of review process to people's personal development programs as part of kind of one-to-ones with team leaders and managers. So there is regular, constant engagement points, and we are having time and spaces to talk about how we're doing, not just about what needs to get done. The next one is exemplify. Exemplify means be the example. As Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. I say to you, be the change you want to see in your world, in your team, in your community, in your society, in your family, by showing up in the right way. And how can we exemplify? Well, don't just talk the talk, walk the walk. Imagine I'm sitting here trying to share strategies with you about managing and dealing with stress, about how to run an organization where well-being sits at the center of what you do. And it's not something I'm able to embody. It's not something I'm exemplifying, because I look clearly stressed and I'm really struggling and I look overwhelmed. You're not going to take me seriously, right? So don't tell people what to do. Be the example. And that's especially true for leaders, but for all of us. Show up as the person you want to be in your society, in your community. And we saw that, particularly in the UK over the last few weeks, where we had obviously some civil disturbances and some civil unrest. And there were people showing up in one way, but there were so many people showing up to exemplify that sense of community, standing up for their community, to celebrate that level of diversity. So rather than attacking those that are not showing up in the way that you desire, be that change. And exemplifying for me is a crucial way to bring about positive change. The next step is empathy. To empathize. Now, you may not know what it's like to be someone else because they're from a different generation. They grew up in a different world to you. They come from a different background. They have a different belief system. They support a different football team. Whatever. There are so many things that we feel separate us. As I said, for me, there is far more that we have in common than separates us. But empathy is the ability to see the world through another's eyes, to be able to stand in someone else's shoes. How can you take time and action within your community, within your workplace, to try and put yourself in someone else's shoes, to be able to experience things from their perspective? Now, it's easy to show sympathy. Oh my God, that's awful. Oh, I feel so sorry for you. Be strong, you'll get through this. Even the best intended sympathy can sometimes make people feel worse. And then also be careful of toxic empathy, where you go so deep into empathy that someone else's problem becomes your problem. It's like, oh my God, I can't cope. I'm so overwhelmed with the issues that you're facing. And now I've gone into such a strong emotional reaction. It's become about me. So just being able to stay grounded and listen and be in here and ask questions to really understand someone's experience can really be a really powerful way to support those around you. So the next one is empathy. And as we move on, the next E in our framework is to empower. Now, remember I said the word power means the ability to do or act. I'm here to empower you. You've given me an hour of your valuable time. The most important resource or asset you have available to you is your time. It's the one thing you cannot replace. And my job is to give you the ability to do or act. With some of the things that I'm sharing, I'm hoping I plant some seeds which will better equip you to show up in your world, in your lives, in your team, in your organization, in your community, in a more empowered way, to take appropriate action to make things better. So consider how you can then in turn empower those around you to give them the ability to do or act in a way that brings them positive results. And obviously these 5 steps are important, but the next 2 for me are where we really ensure that this becomes the way that we do things from this point onwards. And the next step is to evaluate. Don't just do this because you heard it from Neil in a webinar, or you read it in a book, or you saw a blog post on it, or you saw a TikTok video about it. Do it because it works. How do you know it works if you don't do the next E? The 6th E in our 7E framework is to evaluate. Sorry, to encourage. We'll come to evaluate in a second. So encourage is ensuring that people feel valued, giving positive feedback, and particularly in this Zoom, Teams, Skype world, it's easy just to get straight down to business, deal with the technical, functional, operational matters. And because many of us don't spend as much time in close proximity because we're hybrid working and remote working, we may not all be in the office at the same time. You don't often get to go up to your colleagues and say, well done, Matt. You've done a really good job doing support of this session. I'm really appreciating you being in the background. If Matt had been in the studio somewhere else and I'd been at home, I might not have had the ability to share with Matt how valued he is and how much I'm appreciative of his help. The fact that he's here just off camera means I can tell him that, and you've all been here to witness that. Sadly, encouragement seems to be diminishing because we don't have the time or the space for it. And those water cooler coffee machine moments where you get to share about your lives and show people that you value them is crucial for us as human beings to thrive. And as much as I try to skip ahead, the next step is our 6th step, which is to evaluate, ensuring that we have the moments to be able to measure the effects and benefits of change over time. Let's say you start doing a new training program or new diet program, and 6 months later, you weigh more than you did before you started and you feel less fit. It's not working, right? Unless you're evaluating, you might continue doing things that are not bringing benefit. But when we're able to measure benefits and change over time, not only is that going to bolster your commitment, but you've now got hard data points to be able to show, particularly at an organizational level, to senior leadership that this is of business benefit. It's not just putting smiles on our faces and creating a happier, healthier workforce, but it's something that is actually improving our performance. And here's the measurements, whether that's reduced absenteeism, increased performance, reducing attrition, sickness absence. You're getting better subjective measures like people's well-being when you're doing audits and things like that, that we're starting to see people are working better, are more effective, and are enjoying their experience at work more effectively. And this is really where sort of evaluating is really important. And the last one is to embed. Let's make this the way that we do things around here. And how do we do that? Processes, policies, procedures, training. Having resources in place like EAPs, OC Health, etc., but not just as tick box exercises, but as things that people actually use. Because we're doing the positive comms, we're engaging people, and they understand what exists, what purpose it serves, and the benefit that it brings. And then well-being becomes the way that we do things around here. My deepest desire is we can get to the point where well-being becomes the way that we do things around here on planet Earth, where we quite literally create the world that John Lennon sung about in the song Imagine. I get out of bed every morning hoping I can take a little step towards that world. I think it's possible if we all want it enough. And this is really what I want to share with you. For me, what is the recipe? What is the structure, the skeleton to be able to create a culture of well-being? Your job now is to consider, how do you take this framework? How do you take the bridge analogy and the things that we've shared today into your dialogues with your friends, your family, your colleagues, your community, so we can collectively all work towards a more positive outcome? So just by way of recap, the first step is to understand stress isn't the black or white. It's a spectrum from 0 to 100, and there is an optimal point, which is the performance zone. Understand that analogy of stress, the bridge analogy, where if it gets too much, your bridge will ultimately collapse. Lindsay, absolutely. A stress risk assessment, or what we call a wellbeing insights audit, is something that is crucial, and that's a big part of what we do as an organization, is giving people that we work with, giving organizations those metrics, that data, so they can make informed decisions. So if any of you are interested in learning more about that, we've put a white paper together on that. I'm more than happy to share how to go about doing effective well-being audit or a stress risk assessment. And it absolutely works because you know what you're then dealing with. And then obviously beyond the bridge is understanding what are the options you've got about alleviating the load, both collectively and individually. What options can we take to ensure that people are dealing with manageable workloads? And also how we can start to strengthen our bridges. And the next step is obviously consider, how can you utilize this recipe, this framework, to be able to bring positive benefit to your organization. So if we could move on to our next slide, there is a bunch of free resources on our website. There is everything from a 30-day challenge. There's our little journal. There's white papers, or what we call purple papers, which is our tongue-in-cheek approach to white papers. And you'll find that all under our resource hub, all free of charge. So stress.org.uk/resource hub. And if you're interested in learning more about how we can support your organization with some of our audits and risk assessments, our training programs, feel free to reach out. And also, one of the reasons I'm really excited and happy to be here is obviously working with Latus, that has given us the opportunity to consider how we can work together, given they have such a deep desire and a passion, as we do, to create well-being with everybody they work with, and consider sort of how they may be able to help you with some of the resources they have available as well. So as we start to get to the end of the time that we had together today, the first thing I just want to say is I'm blown away at how many of you have turned up for today's session. Our last webinar we broke the registration sheet because we had more than 1,000 signups. We've got the same here today, which is really fantastic. Regularly and consistently, so many of you are showing up time and time again, and it's also really nice to be able to share our message with some new people, and those of you that didn't come from our newsletter. I really appreciate you being here today and giving me a little bit of your valuable time. And remember, this hour potentially will be a complete waste of your time if you do nothing with it. If you've enjoyed this session and thought there's some really interesting points, but you kind of click the off button, go back to your busy lives, go back to doing the things you were doing and take no action, it will have brought you no benefit. And that would have been an hour you've put into something that is not going to deliver any kind of results. For you to get value from this time, you are going to need to do something. You're going to need to take some kind of action. And right here, right now, I want you to consider, what action are you going to take? In fact, hold yourself accountable. Put it in the chat. So we've got 800, 1,000 odd witnesses to be able to observe you making this public commitment to yourself. But also, if you've got questions, stick them in now. I'm going to stay on for a few more minutes and happy to answer any questions, even if we go over the allocated time. I'm totally happy to share with you anything that you'd like to know. And also, given the fact that we had a slightly different format today, we haven't had as much opportunity to get you guys onto camera, but I am absolutely here if you've got any questions. So please do feel free to shout. I'm loving the fact that some of you are going to work on clearing your bridge and clearing your things, clear home, clear mind. Absolutely. You're going to share things on your mental well-being site, prioritize your bridge. Fantastic. Do some more mindfulness.
Burnout.
Good question. How do you recognize when someone's heading for burnout? Now, here's the thing. There isn't a blanket one-size-fits-all way to answer that because we're all different. What you will notice is a change in someone's normal behaviors. You might find some people become really loud, animated, aggressive. They're constantly like getting involved in arguments and disputes. They're voicing their opinions more vocally than they normally would. On the other hand, you get someone that becomes very withdrawn, that disengages, that shuts down. Now, if you understand someone's normal behaviors, if you've got someone that's normally quite engaged, happy, bubbly, communicative, and they've shut down, ask yourself what could have potentially led to that. If someone that is normally quite a calm individual suddenly becomes more animated and aggressive, again, what has led to that change in behavior? If someone is normally really good at managing their boundaries and leaves on time every day and is good at keeping on top of their work, is suddenly working much longer hours. Or it could be someone that's constantly coming in late, someone that's sleeping more, sleeping less. It could be that someone that turns to food and they're binge eating, or they stop eating. So it could be weight gain, weight loss. Someone turns to alcohol, nicotine, caffeine. Someone that is exercising relentlessly or stops exercising. You know, what you've got to bear in mind is your base behaviors will change. But if we don't know people's normal behaviors, how will we pick up when there has been a change? So if you want to recognize when someone's struggling, that's the key thing to consider. Has there been change in their normal behaviors? And based on that, you'll probably be able to recognize when someone's struggling. But then the next thing to do would be to ask a meaningful question. How's your bridge doing? And their response will be, what are you talking about? What bridge? And then you've got an opportunity to explain the bridge to them and then get into a discussion around what the bridge is and ask them how their bridge is doing, or ask them a question they don't have a standard default response to. You ask someone, how are you? Most people say, good, not bad, can't complain, I'm all right. Doesn't tell you anything. Even asking the same question again could open up a more meaningful dialogue. So, how are you? You get your bog standard response and then follow up with, but how are you really? Because what you're then saying is, I really do want to know how you are. It could be asking someone like a random question, like, how are you doing on a scale of 4 to 19? Why? You ask someone how they're doing on a scale of 1 to 10, and most people will say 7. Why? Because it's a nothing number. It doesn't tell you anything about how they're actually doing. So this is the thing. Asking meaningful questions means that you're more likely to get a meaningful response. So hopefully that will better equip you to recognize some of those signs and also know how to engage someone to get them to open up a little bit as well. Fantastic. And Carol, give people your time, most valuable commodity. Absolutely. They don't call this moment the present for random reasons. This moment is a gift. I know that sounds cheesy, but giving someone your presence is the most valuable gift that you can give them, your time, particularly in a world that is running out of time. There just doesn't seem to be anywhere near enough time in our days to do everything that we need to do. So fantastic. Thank you, Davinia. So Ellen, I feel stressed about everything in my life, but part of that is because I'm a perfectionist and want to control everything, then know it's done correctly. How do I let it go? Now, that's a really good question. There's a phrase that I'd offer you. This is my personal mantra. Sloppy success is better than perfect mediocrity. I'll say that again. Sloppy success is better than perfect mediocrity. Everything could be perfect, neat, tidy, and wrapped in a bow, but you might not achieve the outcome that you want. The things that I'm most proud of, the successes that I'm most proud of, were not neat and tidy. They were messy and raggedy and had all kinds of issues and problems, but I got it done. I think there's a physical challenge. I did the Ironman. It's a triathlon. It's the toughest one-day endurance event, apparently. And it was horrible. It was challenging. It wasn't neat, right, tidy, and wrapped in a bow. And there were times where I thought I couldn't go on, and I was exhausted and overwhelmed. But I got the job done. And here's the thing. If it's neat, tidy, and wrapped in a bow, but you didn't get the job done, over time, all you're going to remember is we didn't achieve the results we're looking for. If, for example, I may alienate some people here, but for example, England in the last European Championships, we scrapped and scraped our ways to the final. If we'd won and it was awful and the performance wasn't great, no one would have cared. No one would have remembered because we won, right? Equally, if we played incredibly well and we put in the most wonderful performances, but we got knocked out of the group stages, again, it may have been perfection, but the result wasn't achieved. So the reframe here is focus on the result, not what it looks like. Get to your destination, even if it's not the neat, tidy route you expected. Even if there's traffic, roadblocks, and delays. For me, the ultimate objective should be to achieve the success, to get the job done, to get to where you want to go. I hope that helps. Fantastic. So I have ADD, so I also find it hard to organize myself, which means that when I have a lot on, I struggle even more. What would be a good way to stop being stressed when getting busy and also distracted easily? Now, we've got to bear in mind that we live in a world that is constantly clawing on our attention. So there are different debates and discussions happening right now about ADD or ADHD. Is this a product of our times? Is this an affliction, or is this that many of us being programmed into? So part of this is, if you find yourself easily distracted, what are we doing to build our focus muscle? And there are things that we can do over time to increase our ability to be present to what we're doing. And mindfulness activities are the first thing that come to mind. Mindfulness isn't meditation. It could be. It's not sitting like Buddha under a tree chanting Om, trying to achieve enlightenment, but also it could be. Mindfulness is literally being present in the moment with no judgment. So being present to whatever you're doing. And I appreciate if you've got kind of a mind that's likely to jump from thing to thing, you might start with only a few moments or a minute or two of being able to be present to something. And whether that's just watching my breath, or I'm sitting in the garden just observing kind of what's happening around me, the leaves rustling in the wind, or the birds flying past, or whatever it might be. But the more we do of it, the more we're training ourselves to be present. So, I'd love to say, do this thing and you'll be able to change your focus overnight. It doesn't work that way. It takes time, and we need to build our ability through regular, consistent practice. So there are a number of different things that you can do under the mindfulness banner. That could be mindful walking, mindful eating, mindful conversations, just anything that you do in life, do mindfully by being present to what I'm doing right here, right now, and shutting other things off. And one of the most mindful acts that you can do is turn your phone off, because that gives you more ability to be present to the reality of this moment as it is, rather than as you want it to be. I hope that answered your question, or went some way towards it. Fantastic. I think we've got time for one more, and then we will wrap up for the day. And I really appreciate the fact there's still so many of you here, even though we technically finished 5 minutes ago. And for those who enjoyed this session, we will be sharing the recording, so you've got an opportunity to catch up and also share with friends and colleagues if they weren't able to attend live. Okay, so Suzanne, it's lovely to have you here, and we are going to give you the opportunity to have the last question. I work full-time, have 2 young children, also care for my mum and dad. How can I allocate my time better to have some me time or family time? Now, here's the thing. We all have the same amount of time. It's how we utilize that time. Now, I think many of us struggle because we find it hard to create chunks of time for ourselves. And I'm asking you to consider every so often, whether that's a couple hours a week or half a day a month, where you can actually ensure that all of the things you're responsible for are taken care of. I'm not sure if you have someone else that could look after your children or care for your parents for an afternoon a month or a few hours a week, where you've got some time where you can do something for you. And whatever that is, maybe that even just take yourself out and sit in the garden with a book, or go out and meet a friend for lunch or a coffee, or go for a walk, or just have some time for you to do you. And even if that's only short moments, whether that's 20 minutes a day after the kids have gone to bed, where you can sit down with a cup of tea and just do something that brings you to life, something that you find useful, valuable, allows your heart to sing, allows you to express yourself. So, ultimately, it's rather than how can I allocate my time, where can I create time for myself? So asking a slightly different question hopefully will give you the ability to find that time somehow from somewhere. Hopefully that has helped. I appreciate you all being here so much. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, your presence, your questions. We have lots of other things that we can do to support you, as we've already shared. Latus have their next webinar, which happens every month. We do ours monthly as well, so feel free to join one of those. Ours is actually next week, next Wednesday, so please do come along to that. You'll find details on our website. And yeah, good luck building a stronger, more resilient bridge. Thank you once again.